Last weekend, I had the absolute pleasure of getting to play at the 2025 Coastal Cup Scrabble Tournament. It was so much fun. All of the people were so incredibly nice, incredibly cool, and incredibly better than me at Scrabble. I managed to go 5-10 against these wonderful people over the course of the 2-day tournament, and that's something I'm quite proud of. In fact, at a certain point in the tournament, I was 5-6, but it all went downhill from there. Let's see what we can learn from these 15 games. Let's take a look at some of the phonies or invalid words I played. Starting with penally. I was down pretty big, I didn't have a playable bingo, and I was just willing enough to try this one out. Sadly, it was not valid. Another one was Nellings. This is a pretty similar case, except this one seemed a bit more plausible. Sadly, my opponent challenged this one off too. Another one is Ye. In my defense, I meant to play yeah, hooking high, but accidentally played hey, hooking ye. I was looking at the board upside down. I only noticed my mistake after my opponent challenged. In a similar vein, we've got fi. It was in the end game. I just spent the past 5 minutes trying to make sure I knew which tiles my opponent had and trying to calculate out an optimal end-game sequence. And I accidentally played gi, hooking fi. I thought it was if. After my opponent challenged, I looked down at the board, realized my mistake, and said we didn't even have to get up to go judge it. My best play here would have been verging or vuggier through the V of vow. In this game, I had the opportunity to play azos through the triple word score. I knew azo was a valid word, but I couldn't remember if it had an S hook. It doesn't, and my opponent knew that. The next turn, I play zoas in the same place. Another word that I'm not sure if it takes an S hook. It doesn't. Afterwards, I give up on this cursed spot and play azo down here. In another game, I played shinies. I was really hoping this would be a valid word. In my opinion, it should be. It's very commonly used. I'm going to write a very angry letter to Merriam-Webster telling them to include it in their next dictionary. In fact, shinies with an I isn't valid either. Another one I played was unpliers. I should have played purlines instead. And another one is whooping. I played it because it's a homophone of the valid whooping, but sadly, it is not valid, and my opponent knew that. There were also some phonies I played that weren't challenged off by my opponents. This includes circ, which is a homophone of the valid circ, vainer, a homophone of the valid vainer, David. When I played this one, I knew that Goliath was a valid word, and while researching for my video on names, I learned that Jesse, David's dad, is also a valid word, so I assume David must be. He's not. Later in the same game, I actually hooked to form David's, another invalid word, but once again my opponent didn't challenge. I also played Tao. In my opinion, this should be a valid word. Tao is a valid word, but for some reason Taoism and Taoism also aren't valid. Scrabble's really weird when it comes to religions. For example, Islam and Christianity also aren't valid words. Fun fact, you can't play Christ in Scrabble, but you can play Antichrist. In another game, I play the phony Turnial. In this game, I had this rack, which I can add on to the G in guns to make treading. The one problem? It's not my turn. My opponent plays Chi, blocking this spot. I respond with trade in, which sadly isn't a valid word, but seems reasonable enough that my opponent doesn't challenge. I should have gone with detrain or trained in the same spot. This uses the common retina base that I really should know by now. But for the dumbest phony of the entire tournament was when I played me. I have no idea why I played this or why my opponent didn't challenge. We should really both know our 3-letter words by now. I think we just both had a severe lapse in judgment. Here's some phonies I let stay. One of my opponents played juror. It sounded reasonable to me because there are also words like juror or adjure, but nope, it's not valid. Another one was pose. When my opponent played this, I spent a solid amount of time trying to think if po had an S hook. Turns out po isn't valid either. Another one was sibs. By the time I realized it wasn't valid, my opponent had already drawn her tiles and it was too late. And a very sad one was tart. For this one, it just looked so obviously fake that I assumed she surely had to be confident it was a real word in order to play it, because obviously any competent opponent would immediately challenge it off. Turns out she just meant to play tartar. What about valid words I challenged? The one that haunts me the most is vexed. I had literally been studying my X words right before the tournament, and I knew that there were weird words that end in XT, but I only remembered fixed and mixed, so sadly I challenged this one. A lot of the time, I knew not to challenge my opponent's bingos like sorrier, aeronites, or outerns, as well as a lot of the words I was pretty suspicious of, like equids, varas, and baís, because I knew that a lot of my opponents had a lot better word knowledge than me, so I couldn't just challenge every word I didn't recognize. But I also couldn't just let them play whatever they wanted. Speaking of which, let's take a look at some of my opponent's phonies that I correctly challenged off. Starting with ooh. This is valid in the Collins lexicon, but we were playing in Merriam-Webster. Another one is dazzling. This is one that I was a little shaky on whether or not I should challenge it, because it's pretty similar to dazzling, but luckily I did end up challenging it. In this game, my opponent played dicier, which is a homophone of the valid dicier, but I correctly challenge it off and play wirings in the same place. He follows this up by trying to play Kirby. I stood on this one for a minute before eventually correctly challenging it off. There was one time where I correctly challenged a word, but wish I hadn't. It was the word rel. You see, I had the bingo integer on my rack, but nowhere to play it. After my opponent's play of rel, I can play integer by hooking ran to form rang. But I got so excited by the prospect of winning a free turn off my opponent, an opportunity I so rarely got during this tournament, that I immediately challenged it off. But I once again have nowhere to play integer, so instead I risk it with the phony gentier, which my opponent correctly challenges off. I should have played gentrice, which a word I sadly didn't know at the time, through the sea of chromed. Later on in the game, I actually do end up playing integer by hooking the phony raise, which luckily my opponent doesn't challenge. All of this could have been avoided if I'd just been more patient and not challenged rel even though I knew it was invalid. But how was I so sure it was invalid? Well, you see, rel is one of the words I'm most sad that it's a phony. Why? Well, in the Doctor Who universe, it's a Dalek unit of time. I'm a big Doctor Who fan, so there have been many times where I've been playing Scrabble and really wished I could play rel, but couldn't. If only I hadn't been so sure. Or if I'd known gentrice. Let's talk about my biggest mistake of the entire tournament. I'm down 30 points. This is my rack. I could really use a bingo, a triple word score, or both. In the end, I actually do find my best move of Coates, but it seems wrong. I think maybe it's spelled with an I, and I really don't want to risk losing a turn off of a phony in such a relatively close game. But even if I thought Coates wasn't valid, I should have spotted acetos at the top of the board. In the end, I play cat for 21. Not only did I give up on a bingo, I also gave up this spot for my opponent to play jags. In the end, I lost this game 327 to 358. So this error definitively lost me the game. Let's take a happier note and focus on some of the cooler plays I made during this tournament. Let's start with this game, the same game that I foolishly played David and David's, in which I also managed to find the very cool impox, getting both the P and the X on the double letter squares and scoring big. This is actually a new addition to the dictionary, and so I was hoping that my opponent wouldn't know it, but sadly, she did. As for bingos, we've got this game, where my rack is AEGINT blank. There are quite a few bingos you can make with this. See if you can find one. In the end, I ended up going with teasing, In this game, after my opponent bingoed with partied, my rack was ACELNRS. See if you can find my best move. In the end, I went with cleaners, but I also could have done cleanser in the same spot, or lancers hooked onto Ave. I think that cleanser may have been a bit better of a move since it would have opened up the triple word score a little bit less than cleaners. In this game, after my opponent plays toenail, I have the rack AEFNST blank. Can you see what play I made? In the end, I went for fastens, but I also had fanjets, fatness, and fattens in the same place. Later in the same game, I had this rack. Can you find my best move? In the end, I went with lendings, but I also had ladening and needling in the same place. In another game, I had this rack. Can you find the one possible bingo? It took me some time, but eventually I found Sully's. In another game, I had this rack. There are actually quite a few possible bingos here, including alerter, alterer, and realtor, but in the end I went for relator. I admit I wasn't 100% confident it was valid because no one says, yeah, I relate to that, I'm a relator, but it is in fact valid. This is another one I was really only 90% confident in when I was playing it. See if you can find the one bingo here. It's wirings. For this one, it was the end of my very first game of the tournament. I'm down 153 points, there's no tiles left in the bag, I have no way of winning this game. But if I want to salvage my spread, I have to out bingo here. This is my rack. There are actually 4 different bingos here. See if you can find one of them. They're certain, serotin, creatine, and tacrine. In the end, I go with creatine, bringing this game to a more respectable 306 to 360 loss. Let's take a look at my top 3 favorite moves of the entire tournament. Starting with number 3, this was actually the same game that I played the blunder of trade in. Right after, my opponent plays row, setting up a very dangerous lane through the triple word score if she has an S. I don't have an S, so I can't play there. I run down a minute on my clock trying to find some play that can block this, and then in the end I find it. Waved, extending Ave with a W on the left and a D on the right. As for my second best play of the tournament, it was with this rack. There are multiple possible bingos here, but in the end I went with tubings because I'm 100% confident that it's valid, but it's just obscure enough that my opponent might not know it. And lo and behold, not only does tubings give me 75 points, I also get an extra turn off my opponent's challenge. My best play actually occurred in what already would have been my favorite game in the entire tournament without it. Let's start from the beginning. My opponent starts the game with paver, a strong start indeed. I respond with Meg, and she plays Kex, getting the K on the double letter square and overlapping with the X for big points. I managed to play Craned, overlapping to form Ka, Pen, and Axe. She gets rid of the triple word score with Odic. I haven't seen this word before, but it sounds right and doesn't score too much, so I correctly decide not to challenge, and instead play Chi on the triple letter square. She responds with Quag. I play Sob, overlapping to form Axes and Do. She bingos with Aborted. I play Wad to make Mew and Era. She reaches the triple word score with Hider. I bingo with Manners. She responds with Faye. I play Bay. She responds with Gin. I play Vape hooking Rev. She takes advantage to play Wine, making 3 overlaps and reaching the triple word square. I play Core to hook Vapor. She then plays the stellar bingo of Iodizers, a word I was very sad to see, both because of its massive 86 points and because I was 100% sure it was valid. I play Taj. She plays Hen. I respond with Taft. She is swamped with U's and plays Tutu to get rid of some, even joking, take a guess what that was to get rid of. And here comes the best move I've ever made in Scrabble. K for 10 points. How is that my best move? Well, my rack is EGIILLY, and the unseen tiles to me are LLNOOSSU. And after her last move, the chances are good that my opponent has the U, which means the chances are pretty alright for me drawing an S after a single tile play. And I see that if I draw an S after playing K, I will have Gillies for 89 points on the triple word score. And what do I draw but the S? Luckily, she doesn't see the possibility of me playing this, and after she plays Un, I'm able to hammer Gillies, which she of course challenges, but it comes back valid. And after the 10 points from her unplayed tiles, I bring the score to 435 to 446. That's right. My favorite Scrabble game of the tournament, and possibly ever, wasn't even one that I won. But it was such a fun and memorable game, and I'm very proud not only that I was able to find Gillies, but that I was able to see the possibility of it the turn before and fish for it. After the game, Grace told me that I basically had a lock on the prize for the highest loss, or the highest score of a losing player, and she was right. By the time the awards ceremony, 11 games later, this game was still the highest loss of the tournament, and what a game it was. Let's reflect on all this information. As you can see here, the grand majority of all plays made by both myself and my opponents were valid. In fact, there were several games in which not a single phony was played. But I was more likely than my opponents on average to play a phony. Nearly 8% of the plays I made during this tournament were phonies, compared to only 2.8 for my opponents. This is a big sign that I need to study the dictionary before my next tournament. However, another fact that we can glean from this data is that I was a lot better at challenging than my opponents. If my opponent played a phony, I had greater than a 7 out of 10 chance to catch it. Versus when I played a phony, my opponent only challenged half the time. And before you think that I was just challenging every word, I actually challenged valid words as much as my opponents. Though this includes outplays where a challenge doesn't really lose you anything. So, what are some key takeaways from this tournament? One thing is, the 2 and 3 letter words saved me. They really are the most important. Another is I would really like to work on the Q, Z, X, and J words, as well as the most common 7 and 8 letter words. There were quite a few times I had a bingo on my rack and just couldn't find it. There's an amazing resource called the cheat sheet for those getting into Scrabble. It has all the most important words like the 2 and 3 letter words, words with power tiles, vowel dumps, and the most common 7 and 8 letter words. By my next tournament, I would like to have this whole cheat sheet memorized. The biggest thing for me was, tournament Scrabble is quite different from playing online or with friends. You have to worry about playing a phony, or if your opponent is playing a phony, you have to calculate the score of every move you play, verify the score of all your opponent's moves, and try and keep track of which tiles are left in the bag, all while your clock is ticking down. The time left on your clock is one of your biggest resources in tournament Scrabble. In fact, I managed to win one of my games by a measly 5 points, purely because my opponent got a 10-point overtime penalty. But the most important takeaway from this whole tournament is just how cool the Scrabble community is. So many amazing people. Oh, I've only got 3 seconds left on my clock. Have a nice day! Wait, before you go, I have a couple more charts to show you. Like this one, for example, showing that I played 14 bingos during the tournament, while my opponents only played 11 against me. Of course, this is including my 3 bingos that were actually phonies but weren't challenged, that being Turnial, Trade-In, and Integer, which hooked to form the phony raise. When it comes to valid bingos, we actually played the same amount. This chart shows that I also played slightly more plays worth 40 points or more than my opponents. This shows I wasn't just relying on bingos for points, which is a good strategy if you don't know many 7 and 8 letter words. But if I was playing all these high-scoring plays, why did I only win 5 of my games? I believe the answer to this can be found in this chart. It is generally not good for winning if you are regularly making moves that don't score you nothing. Some of these plays have good excuses, like my rack was awful, I was making an in-game sequence, or I was making a setup play. But I have a feeling making this many low-scoring plays is not a good sign. To see the consequences of this, let's take a look at another graph. Yikes. Let's move on to the next one. Here you can see the spread of each game, aka how much I won or lost by. That tiny win in game 8 is the one I won on time. That huge loss in game 6 is the game where I gave my opponent multiple extra turns with Azos and Zoas. In general, this shows that when I won by little, and when I lost by a lot. Something to work on before my next tournament. Now, before you go, let me show you quite possibly the most important graph of them all. Have a nice day!